Hi, my name is Lily and welcome back to my channel and welcome to my second autism Q&A. Now this one is going to be quite a bit shorter than the first one because most people that I know have already asked a lot of their questions, so if you aren't seeing questions that you have always wondered, maybe check out the first one, which I will link below, but I'm going to be answering the questions people have asked me this time around. There may be some overlap with some of the questions I was asked, but hopefully I will be able to still give you some useful information. I'm going to start with diagnosis related questions. The first one is, did you suspect that you were autistic before you were diagnosed? And yes, I did. I was diagnosed at 20, so to get diagnosed I actually had to ask to be referred, and that is the case for most adult diagnosis. So there's kind of two main ways that adults get diagnosed with autism, and the first one is that they come to the realisation themselves and then ask for a referral, and then the other way is that they seek help for other mental health issues, and this psychologist, psychiatrist, whatever mental health professional they end up seeing then sees the signs that they could be autistic and sends them on for a referral or can diagnose them themselves. So a lot of the time adults are diagnosed with autism either because they were in crisis and it became clear to the mental health professionals that they are autistic as well as having other mental health issues, or because they themselves figured it out and then asked for a referral to get a formal diagnosis. So I was 20 when I got diagnosed. I got referred when I was 19, but the waiting list in the UK is very, very long. It's even longer now because of COVID, but back when I was on the waiting list it was 12 to 18 months, and I think I waited about 15 months to be diagnosed, and then it was about a 3-month process, so overall 18 months from referral to final diagnosis letter. I'd kind of figured it out when I was in my early teens, and I always tell the story that the main reason I realised was because I did one of those online quizzes that was created by actual doctors, and it said that I probably was, and I had mentioned it to family before then, but because I was thriving at school people didn't think I could be autistic because nobody really understood that there were people who were autistic who could kind of go under the radar like I did. I got myself referred during Freshers Week, which is the first week of university in the UK, and the reason for that is I basically had a bit of a breakdown in Freshers Week and I was going there to seek therapy. I went to the doctors to ask for therapy, and while I was there I decided to also ask about being referred for an autism diagnosis because I had a feeling it was impacting my life. I knew if I could get the diagnosis I could get additional support while I was at university that I wouldn't be able to access without it, and I'm really glad I did because without that support I would not have made it through university. For me, the ways that I knew was mostly the social stuff. So I actually remember, and it still upsets me sometimes, thinking to myself as a young teenager and as a primary school age child that maybe you grow into that ability of knowing when people are telling jokes, because I could never figure out when people were joking. I genuinely believe that was something that people grow into. I didn't realise it was a thing that neurotypical people can just do, and that's something I struggled with when I was diagnosed, was realising I would never get that ability. And there was a few other things, like I found it really difficult to maintain conversations. I didn't know how to have conversations with people. I found it really frustrating when people wouldn't take their turns appropriately in conversation, and yeah, things like that. And that still really annoys me. Like, as an autistic person I've learnt the rules of conversation, but neurotypical people don't actually tend to follow these conversation rules that they themselves claim exist. So you know, a lot of neurotypical people will interrupt and speak out of turn and talk over people, and it annoys me. The next question is linked, and so I thought I'd just answer it kind of together, and it was why did you decide to pursue diagnosis as an adult? And for me the main reason was that it would get me support at university. I would highly encourage, if someone's about to go to university, that they would try to get referred at least for diagnoses they think they might have, because even having a referral means that your university will offer you support. So I got referred during Freshers Week of university, and when I got referred, my doctor, who was an absolutely amazing woman, my doctor's surgery in general was awful, but this individual doctor was amazing. She was such an amazing advocate for me, and she wrote a very strongly worded letter to the Disability Services department of my university, basically saying, look, she's autistic. Technically I can't diagnose it, but she scores very, very high on the test. I am certain she's autistic, but it's gonna take 18 months for her to get this diagnosis. You need to provide her support in the interim. And so my university did. I didn't get the financial support that you get through Disabled Students Allowance, which would be things where they like help provide you with printers and laptops and other technology, but I got access to a mentor, which my university paid for while I waited for Disabled Students Allowance to be allowed, and I got extra time on exams. I was allowed to sit exams in a separate room by myself, those kinds of adaptations I got. And without having an autism diagnosis, I wouldn't have got those. You can get some of these just by having anxiety or depression diagnosed, which I did, but autism inherently needs more support in most cases than anxiety and depression does, and has more support systems built in the university system. So yeah, having the autism diagnosis meant that I would get more support at university, which I needed, and that was why I initially decided that I needed to get diagnosed now. Honestly, I don't know if I would have got diagnosed if it wasn't for that. I think the combination of having that breakdown and knowing I needed help was why I did it, but I don't know if I would have done that I don't know if there would have been another scenario that would have propelled me into getting a diagnosis. But here we are. The next question is kind of tricky, and it is, I'm currently going through the diagnosis process, and I was wondering how you managed to get your family and friends to help you with that. So I found this really difficult because I struggled with a lot of shame and internalized ableism, and I really did not want to talk to people about it. My boyfriend, I didn't tell him about it until the day I was diagnosed, so we got together around Christmas, New Year time, and I was then diagnosed Easter the following year, and so I dated him for like 3 months before I told him. And so yeah, that was difficult because I had to go through all of the assessment days, which were very traumatic, very draining, without ever telling him, and none of my friends knew. So I honestly didn't get a lot of help. The only thing that did happen was my parents did have to help, because part of the diagnosis process in the UK is getting your parents involved for an interview about your childhood. And at least that was how it worked in my area. I have heard other people in the UK say they had to do a similar thing. And so I think part of the reason they were involved anyway is because I went to the doctors initially with the breakdown issue because my mum was worried about me, so she kind of sent me to the doctor. So she asked me for an update and I kind of told her about the referral, but then also I didn't really have a choice with that side of it. I just had to, because part of the diagnosis process was they had to go to one of the sessions, not with me there, and answer questions about me, and they had to fill in questionnaires. So yeah, it was difficult. It was really, really difficult, but I didn't have a choice in the matter. It's difficult, and I do wish I'd had a stronger support network at the time, but I just didn't really have any close friends, and I didn't feel comfortable talking to a brand new boyfriend about it. So it is what it is, but I would really recommend talking to people who are safe people in your life about it, and getting that support where you can. But I honestly can't talk from experience because I didn't have that during my diagnosis process. Now the next few are actually really interesting ones that I'm quite excited about answering because they are about work and autism at work. And last time I did this video I had only been working for 6 or 8 months or something like that, whereas now I've been working for nearly 18 months, if not more than that. So I do have more answers for this question. So the first one is, do you have any tips for job hunting while you are autistic? Yes. So the biggest, most important thing is to identify what things you need to be able to work, and they might be different to what a neurotypical person needs. So I had friends when I was graduating university who were applying to jobs all over the country because they were willing to move anywhere, whereas I was only applying either in the home counties around London, which is where I came from, it's where I grew up, it's where I live now, and up in the York and Leeds area, which is where I went to university, because those were the 2 locations I was comfortable with and I knew. I wasn't willing to go outside of that when I knew I would most likely be living by myself. The other thing to consider is your working pattern and what you think might work best for you. If you are new to the workforce, this might be difficult, but hopefully you will have some idea of whether you prefer to work from home, to work in the office full time, or to have hybrid working patterns. So for me, I prefer remote working now, so when I was applying, remote working wasn't a thing. I was applying for jobs before the pandemic, and so my job when I actually was initially hired was for me to be in the office 5 days a week, and I was prepared to advocate for myself to get adjustments that I would need. But now I would actually be prioritising jobs that are either fully remote or mostly remote, because I know that I can create a really healthy working environment for myself at home with all the adaptations I need, and you can't always entrust employers to do that for you. It's important as well to think about jobs that will work with your skills and how your autism presents. So I am currently in a very technical career path. I am working in site resiliency engineering, which basically just means making sure that our company website doesn't go down and to make sure it is very strong. And so it's a lot of back-end technical work, which means I don't have to deal with a large group of people. It's mostly just my colleagues in my team that I work with, so I'm able to bond with them and create those relationships. That means I'm able to communicate with them really well. Last year in my previous placement I was working in a project management team, and it was horrendous for me. It meant I had to talk to lots of different people, don't really get to form connections, and it was really difficult. So for me, I'm now going to be avoiding jobs where it would require me to be on the phone all the time, on video calls all the time, or to be communicating with a lot of different people, or stuff that's very, very collaborative. That stuff just doesn't work for how my brain works. And so that's the kind of thing you need to be considering, is what will be best suited to your abilities. Now, I don't know what country this person is from because I wrote down the questions and not the people that asked, because I'm trying to keep them anonymous. But I would also say to look up if there are any recognitions or schemes in your country that can help indicate employers as good disability employers. So there is the Disability Confidence Scheme in the UK, which basically means that the employer has proven that they are very welcoming and a good employer for disabled people. My current workplace has the second kind of level of Disability Confident Award, but I can't remember what it is. But yeah, so there's different things like that that you should look out for as well, because if they have those awards, it means they are better than others. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be good, but better than others. I would also say to try and disclose at an appropriate time to support yourself rather than them. So I did have someone who tried to encourage me to disclose my diagnosis on my CV and to then play it off as a skill. I personally don't recommend that, because there's still a lot of ableism towards autistic people, even if people don't realise it and it's subconscious. So I actually don't tell a lot of people at my workplace that I'm autistic now. I never told anyone when I was applying what my disability was. I just, when I was applying, I would flag myself as disabled and needing accommodations. A lot of the time I would just have to tick a box on an application form and it would mean that I would be given certain adjustments, and that was great. Always try to look out for that and do that if you can. Some people will be part of application schemes where if you flag yourself as autistic, you will be allowed to skip certain parts of the interview process because they can be a bit discriminatory towards autistic people. And I did that a couple of times. When you get to the interview part of an application stage, or if you're a graduate and similar things, you get to an assessment centre style stage, then it's important to disclose that you are disabled and will need adjustments. So I flagged that, and it meant that on my assessment centre day, because I was a graduate, still am a graduate, my assessment centre day, which is like a big interview day, I was given accommodations. Like I was allowed to start reading the reading material for our exercises early. I was offered to go to a separate area that was quieter to be able to do my prep work. I was given extra time to prepare for my presentation, stuff like that. So flagging that can really help because you can get the accommodations that you need. Honestly, I could make a whole video about tips for job hunting while autistic, so if there's interest in that, let me know in the comments below and I will definitely make that video for you if you want it. The next question is, how does your autism affect your work? I guess I've kind of spoken about it a little bit before. So for me, this is all personal for me, this is not blanket stuff. For me, I prefer working from home because I am able to create a really healthy working environment for me. I am very sensitive to light and to sound, so I can sit with my noise cancelling headphones all day listening to lo-fi beats to help me concentrate. I can make sure the light level is something that's appropriate, and I can get up and move around as I need to. I can access food and water and snacks whenever I need to, stuff like that. that's really important for me, and that really affects me. When I go into the office for the day, I am then like wiped out emotionally for the rest of the week. Also, as I said earlier, I really struggled when I was in a job that required heavy communication elements and lots of communication skills, so I would avoid that in the future. I much prefer jobs where I get a job to do and I do the work. There's also little things out there, like I can never take the minutes in a meeting because I can't write and listen at the same time. I just can't do that. When I was at university, I had to listen back to all of my lectures to write down the notes because I couldn't write notes in the actual lecture. There's just lots of little things during the day. Like, I do struggle to join in with conversations more at work, so I don't always make as good friendships as other people do, but I have some really great friends from work. But I also can get hyper focused, so when I have a task and I am focusing on it, I can sit there for hours and do the task and not get distracted, and it's awesome because it means I can really get through a task quite quickly, and I love that. It means that I think a bit differently about certain things. So my team is currently working on updating a lot of our documentation, and I have been the one that spots a lot of issues in the documentation because my brain works very literally, so they will think they've been very clear and I'll go and read their documentation and be like, what does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? And they'll be like, oh. So I'm actually quite good at writing and proofreading documentation because I spot those kinds of things. The next question is, how do you make your work environment more autism friendly when you're working from home? Oh, I love this question. So I've already said some already. I have noise cancelling headphones and I wear those most of the day because my mum also works from home, and she's literally on the other side of the wall to my desk. So yeah, I spend a lot of time with my noise cancelling headphones on. I have like a sheer blind that I can pull down that will reduce the brightness but still let in natural light, and then I can also just close the blind completely in here if it gets too bright. I have lots of lamps to help with that as well. I have a very comfortable gaming chair, which is expensive, but I decided it was worth the investment because it really helps me stay comfortable and I can like wiggle back and forward in it, which is amazing. Great stim. So I try to also surround myself with my special interests while I'm working. I have my bookcases next to me, which you have seen in my other videos, so I'm constantly surrounded by my books, and I also have other little pieces of like memorabilia and nostalgic things around my desk to help me feel more comfortable and settled. But the biggest one is the bucket of stim toys. So this is a little woven bucket I bought, and whenever I buy a new stim toy it goes in here, and I'm going to show you them quickly because these are my favourites. So the first one, I'm going to show you if I can find it, is the one that I will take to work with me if I go to the office, and it is a fidget cube. I might actually show you my one that I have by the bed because this one's all black and it's really hard to show on camera. Okay, this one's a bit better. So this is not the one that I use at work because it's a bit ostentatious, but this is the one I have on my bed so that when I'm like watching TV I can use one. But I take the black one to work with me because it's a bit more understated and I can subtly play with it without people kind of thinking it's weird or noticing it as much. Fidget cube, you can get them on Amazon. Both of these are from Amazon. You can buy them from specific stim toy companies, but I find they're always out of stock. So you have this metal ball bearing that is like, you can spin it around and you can depress it. You have these thingies you can spin. You've got a joystick you can spin and it pulls out. These buttons you can press in. The ones on this diagonal here click and these two corner ones don't. Then you have, this is my favourite one, it's a spinny disc and you just spin it, and you have a light switch. So this is the one that I get the most use out of. I tend to sit holding it and spinning the spinny wheel quite a lot of the time. So that's one. The other ones I found through Sound of the Forest on TikTok, and they are hedgehog balls. So these aren't all of them, you get them in big packs, but I shared this with someone else, and so they are just these like spiky rubber balls. They are a little bit squeezy, very bouncy, and they just feel great. So when I'm stressed they can be good because the sensory stuff of like squeezing the spikes helps reduce my stress. Then you have the good old classic stress balls. This one's actually a scented stress ball, so it's a double whammy. So this one smells like vanilla, and yeah, it's a good squish. I also have french fries. Then you have poppets. So I've been told this is a squid, don't know how. Whale, dinosaur. And yeah, I mean, if you don't know how poppets work, you can just pop these bubbles. You can just pop the bubbles in and out simple. They're ones I don't use as much because they're noisy, because of the popping noise, but these are ones I might choose to use when I'm reading something on a screen and it helps me concentrate. And finally, stretchy cats. So little cat toys, you can stretch them. They're very satisfying to play with. I don't use these ones very often because they get quite grimy. They pick up a lot of dust because they're quite sticky. So yeah, I don't use these ones very often, but they are there if I need to. Little cats and cat paws. Yeah, those are my least favourites, but I do use them sometimes. So yeah, if you have any more suggestions for stim toys, let me know, because the bucket is not full. I can get more. And yeah, I could use more variety, but I just struggle to find small stim toys. So if you know of any, let me know. Now the next one is like an autism specific one that I've been asked to explain. So someone asked me if I could explain about the history of the Asperger's diagnosis and why it is no longer used. So this one's a bit controversial, and I want to start by saying, if you still identify as Asperger's because that's what you were diagnosed with, that is valid. You do not need to change that if it doesn't make you uncomfortable, in my opinion. Other people will tell you otherwise, but if it's what you feel comfortable with, you do you. And I would say to allies that if someone says that they are Asperger's, I wouldn't tell them they are not, because that's the diagnosis they received. It's not diagnosed anymore. But if someone was diagnosed as that in the past, it is completely valid for them to continue to use that diagnosis if that's what they feel comfortable with. So the history of Asperger's is very interesting and very sad. Hans Asperger was obsessed with autistic children, essentially, and so he was one of the pioneers of autism and Asperger's research. He was a doctor, and in the 1940s, working in Vienna, he studied around 200 children, I think, and he found 4 children in those 200 who he saw were socially struggling. And he basically came up with this diagnosis, which was called, I believe it was autistic psychopathy, where he basically said that autistic children were psychopaths, because that's great. So that's already not a great start to this story, but he noticed that there were some children in this autistic subset who he described as little geniuses, and they struggled socially but were incredibly intelligent. And it was also noted that by some people that he was kind of similar to these children, and that's how they then became known as Asperger's children. And so the diagnosis of Asperger's stems from that. However, if we put aside the fact that he called autistic people psychopaths, we can kind of see from that why people might think Asperger's is fine. The thing is, there is a lot of proof that Hans Asperger was involved with the Nazis and helped to send a lot of disabled children to their deaths during the Nazi regime. There's lots of letters to prove this. And he basically used his new Asperger's diagnosis to explain to the Nazis that autistic children were not fit to live, but children who were Asperger's were, because they were very intelligent. And so it was only the intelligent Asperger's children he deemed worthy of staying in society, and not the unintelligent autistic children. The main difference between autistic and Asperger's diagnoses were the fact that people who were diagnosed with Asperger's were deemed to have high IQ, which we all know IQ is a completely racist, ableist thing. But yes, they were deemed to have high IQ, and they were less likely to have had speech delays or didn't have speech delays at all. So that is the main reason why people don't like the diagnosis, is because it basically was created as a divider between autistic people who society viewed as less worthy to live and worthy to live. It wasn't introduced into the diagnostic manual until the 1990s, and it was removed in the 2013 edition. And basically between those time periods, they came to realise that there wasn't really that much of a difference between people who were being diagnosed as autistic and Asperger's, especially as they grew into adulthood. And it just kind of became proven that there was no difference, and that they were just presenting with the same disability differently. And so people who had been diagnosed as Asperger's are actually autistic, and the diagnoses were merged under autism. So it is now not diagnosed in most countries who follow that, and it can get diagnosed still in some places, I know that for sure, but for the vast majority of the Western world at least, you will not be diagnosed with Asperger's anymore, and definitely not in America. I think it's definitely not used there anymore. There are people in the autistic community who try to argue that those that were diagnosed with Asperger's should stop saying that, and that they shouldn't be allowed to say that they are Asperger's. And the reasoning for that is there has always been an issue within the community of some people who have been diagnosed with Asperger's, not all but some, viewing themselves as better, more worthy, less disabled, all those kinds of things, and so kind of viewing themselves as superior to people diagnosed as autistic. So it's a very controversial thing in the community still. There will be some people who think that you should still be allowed to identify yourself as Asperger's. Personally, I think if someone was diagnosed with Asperger's and that's how they most feel comfortable presenting, then I think it's fine as long as they don't use it as a I am superior coin. But there are people out there who think that no one should be allowed to say it anymore, and it's easy to see why. And the problem I have with it is a lot of the time you will get parents doing this as well, where they will say like, oh, he's not autistic, he's just got Asperger's. The problem as well with trying to draw that distinction is that people who are diagnosed with Asperger's were offered less support than autistic people, even though they actually were all just autistic. And people who were diagnosed with Asperger's still did need support, they just might be covering it up more than other autistic people were. So it actually works against both the people being diagnosed as Asperger's and the people who weren't being diagnosed as Asperger's. So it's not really used anymore, and not in the UK anymore. If it had been used, I would have been diagnosed as Asperger's because I fit all of the Asperger's boxes, but I was told by my diagnostic centre that they don't use that diagnosis anymore, and the UK doesn't. And finally, we have two bookish questions. The first one is, what is your favourite BIPOC autistic book? Now, I actually really love this question because two of the most popular autistic authors are actually BIPOC, and so I get to talk about one of those authors' books today. I think we're quite fortunate in the autistic bookish community that even early on in us getting representation in books, we are getting BIPOC people being able to have their books. So my favourite autistic book by a person of colour is The Kiss Quotient by Helen Huang. This is about an autistic woman named Stella who wants to have a relationship, but she realises that she doesn't feel like she knows how to have sex, and she thinks that's why people don't want to be in a relationship with her. So she hires a male escort to teach her how to have sex, and they end up having a fake romance where he then teaches her how to be in a relationship. It's great, it's steamy, it's really fun, and I found her really relatable. So yeah, that's probably one of my favourites, but I'm going to be cheeky and I'm going to talk to you about two others that I also really love. So another romance favourite is Actual Age Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert. This was, I think, Talia Hibbert's first book where the character said they were autistic on page, but she has had more since. And it's so good. Another steamy romance. This one is about Eve Brown, who decides that she needs to prove that she can be independent and wants to go and get a job, and she goes to this B&B and interviews to be a chef despite not being a chef, and obviously gets rejected. But then on her way out she accidentally knocks over the owner of the B&B, and she feels so bad she offers to stay and run the B&B for him while he recovers, and they have an enemies to lovers romance. So good, so sweet, and I really liked how she was a portrayal of a non-socially awkward autistic person and also late diagnosis. And finally, Convenience Store Women by Circa Murata. This one might actually be my favourite of the three. I love Circa Murata's writing. This one's about an autistic woman who works in a convenience store and has worked there her whole working life and absolutely loves her job there, but she feels pressure from society to go and get a proper job and to be in a relationship, get married, have kids, so she decides to try and see what that life is like, and it's about her kind of realising her purpose in life and what makes her happy. It's awesome. You definitely need to read it from a perspective of she is autistic, not quirky, because a lot of people laugh at this, and I feel like if you're laughing at some of the stuff that happens in this, you're a teeny bit ableist. But yeah, it is such a really, it's such an amazing book because you get to see how autistic people are kind of pressured to fit in when they don't need to. And now the final question is a juicy one, and it is, what do you think of the current representation of autism in the publishing industry and what could be done better? It's bad. It's not good. It's not good. I feel like disabled creators are having their gentle increase moment that we saw happening for LGBT creators and then writers of colour had a while ago, and it's kind of depressing because they're still struggling to get good representation and it feels like we're still many years behind them. So it shows that every marginalised community has a long way to go, but I feel like disabled people are the ones that are the furthest behind right now. I would say autistic representation is not great because we're still getting a lot of books published where it's all about, you know, the relatives learning to love their autistic relative, or about how awful it is to have an autistic relative and stuff like that, and we're still getting a lot of non-fiction books all about how awful we are, how parents are trying to cure their autistic children and things like that. So it's not good. I think we need more books written by autistic writers with autistic main characters in them, or autistic side characters, and less other people writing about us. Although I will say I have read a couple of books recently that aren't by Own Voices authors who use sensitivity readers and did their research, and they were amazing. But when people are still recommending The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime as a book about autism, you know we need to do better, because that is one of the worst autistic representations you can find. So yeah, it's not good, and I also think they need to be making more efforts to have autistic people in the editing rooms and the marketing rooms and all of those places, and to be finding and supporting more sensitivity readers and stuff like that. So there's a long way to go, but I am very, very hopeful that we are going to keep improving. I feel like marginalised groups are making steps every day to get better representation in the publishing industry, and disabled people will get there. We will eventually. We just have to keep on working, keep on trying, and it will happen. So this definitely is longer than I was expecting it to be, but I hope I answered everyone's questions sufficiently. So thank you for watching. If you have any other questions for me, put them down in the comments and I will do my best to reply. If you like this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing to see more content from me. All of my social media links are in the description below, and if you'd like to leave me a comment to let me know you are here, leave me a rainbow emoji in the comments below. Thank you again for watching, bye!